I'm going to turn to Stephen Barclay, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, member of the Cabinet. Stephen, very good to see you. I slightly lost count today how many times I heard the Chancellor saying he was levelling with us, he was being honest. But he also said that freezing the income tax thresholds would mean, and I'll quote him here, nobody's take-home pay will be less than it is now. But that's to sort of imply that most British people don't understand that when inflation rises, their pay falls, and he's not protecting them against that. So he is making people poorer, isn't he? He didn't level with us.
No, he's right, and people's take-home pay won't fall. But
what about the effect of inflation? What about the effect of inflation? You're not protecting them against inflation.
What's different to what John was just saying is we all remember from Gordon Brown's budgets that it used to take several days for the detail to come out and for them to be seen in terms of exactly what was there. Rishi did level with the public. We've spent £350 billion in our COVID response. Nick is absolutely right in that over the previous 10 years, it's because of the responsible decisions taken by previous chancellors that the Chancellor today has been able to respond with the fiscal firepower that he has. But at the same time, we need to be honest and take decisions which Nick and I would prefer not to have to take, but that recognise that wider financial cost as a result of COVID. And I think the difference between the Gordon Brown era and what the current Chancellor has done is he's been very upfront. He's been very upfront on corporation tax. He's been very upfront in terms of the thresholds. And indeed, Robert, we're having that conversation tonight on the night of the budget and not several days after, which used to be the case in the Labour era. But
I just really wonder what... Look, I've got the budget book here in front of me. It says that as a result of freezing these thresholds, there will be... The people will... You know, the Treasury, let's be clear, will be £6 billion better off. That is £6 billion out of people's pockets.
Yeah, and that's where we're being honest. I mean, that is there. That's the point. It's not hidden, Robert, exactly as you say.
So take-home pay is falling. Take-home pay is falling.
The Chancellor has levelled with the British public, which is we're doing three things in this budget. We're protecting jobs through the ongoing COVID crisis. As we unlock through the roadmap, we need to continue that support, and the Chancellor set that out through things like the furlough scheme, the self-employed income support scheme, going longer than that than perhaps many of your viewers would have expected, giving that support to protect jobs. But he did level with the public. He was honest about the fact, and it's there in clear text in the Red Book, in terms of we do need to take some difficult decisions, not kick the can down the road in terms of the fiscal position, because of the risk in terms of any changes to inflation or interest rates in the future. And because, let's be frank, in the last 10 years, we've seen two 1-in-100-year events. And the responsible thing to do is to ensure that we do prepare in case we have future events that we need to deal with. So the Chancellor did level, but he also did a third thing, which I think was hugely important, Robert, which is in terms of signal how we're going to support businesses to invest in the high-tech, green jobs of the future, to level up across the UK. Things like that super deduction, taking us from the 30th to the first place in the OECD in terms of business investment, making it really attractive, coupled with changes on immigration to attract talent from around the world. So on skills, on infrastructure, on our immigration, supporting businesses, but also being upfront in terms of there is £100 billion of support
Stephen,
that went to businesses,
and it's right that they contribute. You made a big song and dance about, you know, the green investment, but, you know, a Tory think tank, Bright Blue, has some thoughts about that. Anushka.
Yeah, we went to some big think tanks about what was missing from the budget, and Ryan Shorthouse at Bright Blue said that the climate agenda was lacklustre, and he said the government has yet again foolishly cut rather than maintained the value of fuel duty. It still lacks the ambitious and necessary policies to support more people with the path to net zero.
Stephen, how can you claim to be leading the world on climate change when you've turned down £900 million just by uprating fuel duty?
Well, I think across the United Kingdom as a whole, as talking to colleagues in Scotland today, many communities where fuel duty is a big cost and the cost of living. But if you look at, for example, not just the announcements today, but in the spending review, the 14.6 billion investment in R&D, the Prime Minister's 10-point plan in terms of net zero, the change in terms of the Bank of England's remit to give greater prominence to the issue in terms of net zero within their second priorities, along with the primary priority in terms of price stability. So there's a range of things we're doing to support.
But in terms of levelling up, again, the big thing,
the United Kingdom, there were specific measures.
We haven't got a lot of time, so I need to talk to you about other issues. Levelling up, obviously important. And again, Anushka has got an important piece on this from the Resolution Foundation.
Yep, Torsten Bell, Chief Executive, welcomed the furlough measures, but said he's really worried about the cutting of universal credit, said it will result in unemployment support dropping to its lowest level in 3 decades when job losses are mounting, and says the result is that in autumn, for millions, this will not feel like a living standards recovery. So
for a government that insists that it's levelling up, why would you say that in 6 months' time you will take away this vital support from the poorest families?
Well, firstly, the Resolution Foundation have acknowledged things like the threshold freeze is very progressive in terms of our approach. As for sort of universal credit, it is important to see that in the round. It was always a temporary measure as part of our response to COVID, but it sits alongside a wider package of support, things like help on council tax, help on rent. So there's a range of measures. But the best way to help people is in terms of the skills agenda, getting people with the £3,000, for example, on apprenticeships, getting the traineeships increased, the restart, the kickstart scheme. So getting people's skills levels up, protecting their jobs and getting more people into the quality jobs. And there were specific announcements today that give force to that.
And then on this issue of balancing the books, we spoke to the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Yeah, this is Paul Johnson, and he says that spending plans from 2022 do not include money to deal with any additional pressures from the pandemic, of which he says there are going to be plenty. In fact, they involve spending cuts relative to pre-pandemic plans. He asks at the bottom of this, is that credible?
And this is actually in the OBR's report as well. They simply don't believe that you can, not spend money on expanding the health service, expanding social care and on schools as a direct result of this crisis that we've been through, and yet you are factoring in nothing for any of that.
Well, we are increasing spending. I mean, 33 billion more into the NHS over the course of the long-term plan. By 25-26, real-term day-to-day spending in departments will be 2.1% higher. There's a 3% real terms increase with the 20 billion extra this year, 22 billion extra next year, so 42 billion of day-to-day increased spending. There's 100 billion going on the capital side. In terms of infrastructure, that's 30 billion more than 2 years ago. So there's a huge investment that is going in. That is a key part, Robert, as you say, of levelling it up across the United Kingdom. But it sits within that wider vision that the Chancellor set out.
But can I ask you about these numbers? Are these numbers on spending, in your view, set in stone? Because even putting to one side whether or not you will face enormous pressures to increase health and social care spending, for example, and as I say, the OBR thinks you will, the numbers you've put in here do imply very significant cuts outside of your core areas. Are you going to stick to those cuts?
No, I don't accept that, because I think that, part of that is the way inflation, the deflators apply. So that is part of why there's an adjustment in terms of some of those numbers. But the fundamental point is that there's significant day-to-day departmental spending increases, a strong commitment in terms of our commitment to the NHS. And people can see that through our response to the COVID pandemic, the £350 billion of additional spending. But ultimately, Robert, the way forward is to get the economy growing. It's to get that investment from businesses. That's why the Chancellor set out measures such as that super deduction, the 130% to get businesses investing in the plant and machinery, the approach to attract talent from around the world, to build on what we set out in the spending review in areas like our R&D budget. So get the growth is the key way forward, but within departments themselves and our commitment to public services, that is absolutely within our plans, and that's why we're recruiting 20,000 extra police officers, the 50,000 extra nurses, and indeed building those 40 new hospitals.
I mean, just to be clear, even putting to one side the so-called deflator issue, a complicated issue, the OBR simply basically says that if you are going to achieve the numbers that you've got here, there will have to be cuts in many departments. Are you saying the ABI is just wrong? It's just a straight yes or no?
Well, I'm saying that the way they've interpreted it is because of the complexity around deflators.
That's not what they're saying. We can talk about this later. Honestly, that's not what they're saying, Stephen, because there's a separate bit.
If you look at day-to-day departmental spending, Robert, 20 billion higher this year, 22 billion pounds higher next year, 2.1% higher at the end of the scorecard. So there's strong commitment to day-to-day spending, and that sits alongside the very strong investment on the capital side, 30 billion more than 2 years ago.
Stephen, always a joy to see you. Thank you so much for coming.